We're good to go. Hey, everybody. Good evening. And thank you for coming in for another beautiful, amazing video of Indigenous podcast. And today we are actually going to discuss an article called Mestizaje and Self Hate. I think this is going to be a really eye-opening article for a lot of people, especially those that might be on the fence, is like figuring out like who they are, especially those people in Mexico, Central South America, and even those people that might say that they're Hispanics, Latinos in the United States. Again, before I hand it over to Wanchaloa, again, thank you all so much for supporting us, the comments, even the dislikes. So yeah, thank you. Wanchaloa, I'll let you take it over.
All right. First of all, to two loyal people that have followed us from the beginning, Jose Garcia and Fidel Garcia, thank you. You guys are the ones that showed us this article, so shout out to y'all. So this article is kind of a return to some of the old basics that we talk on the channel a lot, Mestizaje and self-hate, but I think you guys will still enjoy it. It's a different take, and it criticizes one of the Chicano poems, I Am Joaquin by Rodolfo Gonzalez. So without further ado, we will jump into this. All right, Mestizaje and Self-Hate by Victor Meja.
La Raza, Mexicano, Espanol, Latino, Hispano, Chicano, or whatever I call myself. I look the same. I feel the same. I cry and sing the same.
All right, so yeah, that's from I Am Joaquin, which is a beautiful poem. Like as a writer, I can appreciate the skill in the craft that he employed when creating this. Like I envy it. I'm a writer myself, but I write like science fiction. I got a science fiction book published. It's called Golden Skies. It's on Amazon. But I've never been able to do poetry. And this guy does poetry very, very well. But as we're about to see, I just think it's flawed in terms of the content of the work, in terms of the style, in terms of the writing itself. It's absolutely beautiful. But anyways, as Chicanos, Mexicanos, we claim a mixed cultural heritage called Mestizaje, but we really do not know where we are, which explains why we juggle different labels of identity, like the ones exclaimed in Gonzalez's epic poem. We are indecisive about our cultural identity, and we embrace Mestizaje because 509 years of colonial domination have convinced us that that is who we are. But Mestizaje is nothing to be proud of. It is a damaging concept that, like everything else from the conquest, has served to crush our indigenous heritage and our dignity. It has ruined us spiritually and psychologically and promoted self-hate. It has blurred the understanding of ourselves as indigenous people and furthered the disintegration of our ancient indigenous culture. Perhaps no other ethnic group is as self-conscious and irresolute about its self-worth than the Mexican people. Mexicans reproach their identity. They characterize themselves in a self-abasing tone as hijos de la chingada, fruits of the violation of Indian women by Europeans. The verb chingar is replete with the meaning. But as Octavio Paz explains in his essay, Sons of La Malinche, its essential meaning is rooted in physical aggression. The verb denotes violence and emergence from oneself to penetrate another by force. It is also means to injure, to lacerate, to violate bodies, souls, objects, and to destroy. La chingada, then, is the mother forcibly opened, violated, or deceived. She is the raped Indian mother of us all, who is associated with the conquest, which was also a violation not only in the historical sense, but also in the very flesh of Indian women.
I feel like that would sound like somewhat psychological damaging to your mind.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's an ugly way to put it. Like, hijos de la chingada, that sounds very harsh in Spanish, man.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll add on here. Yeah, ironically, racial mixture was revealed in 16th century New Spain. Mixing with native people was deemed disgraceful by the conquistadors, who pride themselves in their limpieza de sangre, purity of blood. Still, this did not stop some male Spaniards from forcing themselves on native women, then abandoning their offspring. Their atrocious behavior was so prevalent in the years following the conquest that the term mestiza was almost synonymous with bastard. The concept of mestizaje, therefore, is rooted in the idea that Mexicans are half-breeds, illegitimate children, not fully Indian, not fully European. In the 18th century, the criollos co-opted mestizaje as an ideology to help fuel their movement for independence from Spain. By the turn of the 19th century, Mestizaje was sufficiently forged into a national Mexican identity. Mestizaje was further promulgated and institutionalized in 1925 with the help of Jose Vasconcelos, Mexico's former Minister of Education. In his well-known essay La Raza Cosmica, The Cosmic Race, Vasconcelos champions Mestizaje, viewing it as the only hope for humanity. He argues that a cosmic fifth race will emerge once the four races of the world, the black, the Indian, the Mongol, and the white, are fused together. He believed that this process had already begun in Mexico with the arrival of Europeans, and the true peace and love on earth would reign once the intermixing was complete.
Good old Vasconcelos, man. We are going to cover his essay in a separate little video series. Me and Marcus realized like we're going to have to just kind of summarize it in terms of like every 10 pages we'll summarize it and do a video because we can't actually read word for word without getting in trouble. But yeah, we've mentioned him before, definitely. And what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, I was going to mention to throw in the book Before Mestizaje by Ben Vincent III. It's an instrumental book that I use. One of my major scholarly sources whenever I'm writing articles about Mestizaje, anything like that. Early on, yeah, the Spanish fathers, a lot of them would abandon their children, when they violated an Indian woman or whatever. And these children were accepted into indigenous communities because they weren't accepted as Spaniards. So even back then, someone that wasn't 100% was accepted into communities. I'm just going to throw that out there. What is going to merge out there is the definitive race, the synthetical race, the integral race made up of the genius and the blood of all peoples, and for that reason, more capable of true brotherhood and of a truly universal vision. It is a romantic theory made insidious by the fact that Vasconcelos viewed Christianity and Iberian culture as the foundation for the fifth race. He did not envision a shared hybridized culture or spirituality. Instead, he surmised that Christianity would guide the cosmic race into a new human epoch. Only the Iberian, i.e. the Spanish, element of Latin America possessed the spiritual factors, the race, and the territory necessary for the great enterprise of initiating the new universal era of humanity. In other words, this new era would remain rooted in European culture. All other cultures would be assimilated into it.
It's amazing to me that so many people in Mexico just ran with what he said and put him in the position of education.
Yeah, Minister of Education. I mean, but that's another reason why things are the way they are, because when you have somebody that is spreading these ideas and he's in charge of education, he passes the policies, he's in charge of the curriculum, I'm sure, with that position. That's why you have so much backlash nowadays with us whenever we try to go against this norm, this whole mestizo concept. People are like, what are you talking about? But it's because you grow up and you're indoctrinated into thinking this way. And I'm sure they don't really point out the flaws in his work, nor the really racist parts of his work as well, which again, I mean, I've mentioned that in my own published article, and we're going to mention this in the future whenever we cover the essay itself in depth.
It was pretty racist. But yeah, going back to the next, or going forward to the next paragraph, there was no world he hoped would assimilate more completely than Native America, which Vasconcelos considered inferior to European society. In his prologue to the 1948 edition of La Raza Cosmica, he writes, Christianity made the American Indians advance. In a few centuries, from cannibalism to a relative degree of civilization, Vasconcelos found nothing redeemable in indigenous society and believed strongly that the Indian had no other door to the future but to the door of modern culture, nor any other road but the road already cleared by Latin civilization. Moreover, he credited the white race for bringing the world to a state in which all human types and cultures would be able to fuse with each other. But again, he did not mean a harmonious blend of disparate cultures. He meant the assimilation of non-Western people into a European model of civilization. Vasconcelos' ideas exemplify the truth about Mestizaje, that it is a Eurocentric concept advocating westernization of native people in exchange for their ethnocide. In the United States, Vasconcelos continues to influence how Chicanos view themselves and their history. His ideas have helped lay the ideological foundations of Chicano studies programs. Despite the inherent racism of these ideas, at California State University, Northridge, for instance, students study the social, cultural, and political developments of North America, beginning with the Spanish conquest. Particular emphasis is placed on the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848 and the Chicano movement of the 60s and 70s. Pre-Columbian civilization, on the other hand, is ancillary. The school offers one semester course in Mesoamerican civilization, an independent study course in classical Nahuatl, and a third course in Mexican philosophical thought, which overviews the religious centrism that occurred in Mexico in the colonial period. But the core of the Chicano studies curriculum remains rooted in the events of the last 150 years and in the distinct Mexican Chicano identity that emerged as a result of Anglo and Spanish colonization. The 4,000 years of the indigenous civilization that preceded the arrival of Europeans, beginning with the Olmec, is virtually ignored. Thus, Chicano studies is an actual mestizo study. It tenders a predominantly post-conquest worldview of North America that inculcates Chicanos into identifying as mestizos and not as indigenous people.
Dude, those last three sentences probably will trigger quite a bit of people, man. That's pretty savage right there. Chicano studies is actually mestizo studies, man. That's going hard, man. I was gonna throw this out there. I love my Chicano brothers and sisters, but we're gonna set the record straight here because we have our haters that criticize us. But it's like, before you come at us, little goof, you might want to get your facts straight. I'm not a Chicano. I'm Mexican. I was born in Mexico. I came here when I was like 4 or 3. All right, I know Spanish pretty well. Yeah. My parents, my parents were born in Mexico completely. They were raised there. And Marcus was born in Peru. He's a Peruvian.
I mean, some people, just don't get it.
Right. Like, nothing against Chicanos. I love Chicanos. Like I said, my brothers technically would be Mexican-American or Chicanos because they were born here. But if you're going to come at us, you need to get your fucking facts right. Just throwing that out there. All right. So this emphasis on Mestizaje permeates much of Chicano literature as well, and no poem exemplifies this better than Gonzalez's I Am Joaquin, written in 1966. Joaquin was the quintessential expression of Chicano Mexicano identity and struggle during the 60s and 70s. The poem's embittered reproach of gringo society articulated the common feelings held by many Mexicans of the time who felt victimized, discriminated against, and denied entry into America's social institutions. The title itself an allusion to the 19th century California bandit Joaquin Murrieta, who tangled with the Americans because of their treatment of Mexicans and sought revenge against all gringos after his wife was murdered by miners during the gold rush, symbolized the race relations between Mexico and Anglos. Praise for its social, political critique of American society and for its literary style, I'm Joaquin remains at the core of Chicano culture identity. It is an absolutely beautiful poem in terms of the prose. Yes, very, very carefully crafted with a lot of expertise. But the crisis of identity expressed by the poem's peculiar glorification of Mestizaje, that is, the mixing of Spanish and Mexica Aztec culture, has never been adequately examined. The poem's protagonist, Joaquin, agonizes over being mestizo and ventures on an internal journey to reconcile two cultures, but his epic struggle is futile, for Joaquin fails to overcome the greatest obstacle facing him, his self-hate. This is the poem's most salient and pertinent feature, for it exemplifies a profound inferiority complex that has been intrinsic to Chicano Mexicano identity since the conquest. Let's see. And I'll tackle all these like little lines, Marcus. Although the poem appears to be exalting the indigenous past while vilifying the Spanish conqueror, it remains a glorification of Mestizaje. The poem refers to Hernan Cortez as a gachupin, a pejorative term. In the fifth stanza, Joaquin boldly identifies with Cuauhtémoc, the last Hoy Latuani, great speaker of the Mexica. Sorry if I butchered that. I don't know Nahuatl, guys. I am Cuauhtemoc, proud and noble leader of men, king of an empire civilized beyond the dreams of the Gachupin Cortez. But immediately following his assertive expression of indigenous pride is this particular line, who also is the blood, the image of myself. And I remember I read that poem, and when I saw that line, I like, you know, in anime, like whenever an anime character, like they have like a vein burst in their forehead or like pops out. That's what happened with me when I read that line. Here's the schism within Mexican identity. By disparaging Cortez as a Gachupin, then identifying him with him as a blood, the image of myself, Joaquin is essentially internalizing his disdain for the Spanish conquistador. He is attesting himself. This peculiar glorification saturates the entire poem. I am the Maya prince. I am Nehuacoyotl, great leader of the Chichimecas. I am the sword and flame of Cortez, the despot. Now, yeah, I mean the whole poem is like this, bro. Like, and that's the thing that like I was really disliking, because it just seemed like, I don't know. It's just like, it's just a war within yourself. It's like you're trying to make it something positive, as in like, look at me, I'm a badass, like from both sides. But one side was completely like disgusting people that like subjugated one side of your ancestors and tortured them and forced them to assimilate, destroy their identities, rape them. And you're trying to take on that identity too. And it's, I don't know. It just, I mean, you could tell the conflict even in the poem. It's just like that it just doesn't feel right, you know?
No, I agree. It doesn't. I mean, I respect the poem, but obviously there are things I disagree with.
Yeah, definitely.
So, the merging of both the indigenous world and the despotic forces that brought it to ruins infuses the poem with a schizophrenic tone. Joaquin condemns the hordes of starved strangers who he changed our language and plagiarized our deeds, yet proudly announces that the part of the blood that runs deep in me could not be vanquished by the Moors. I defeated them after 500 years, and I endured. To glorify this ethnic and racial mixture is, of course, the point of the poem, but this glorification reveals an unresolved internal turmoil. It exposes a crisis in identity in the protagonist, Joaquin. Joaquin sides with the conquering nation by proclaiming he owned the land as far as the eye could see under the crown of Spain, but then also states he gave his Indian sweat and blood for the Spanish masters. Joaquin is conqueror and conquered. I was both tyrant and slave. I am the Aztec prince and Christian Christ. These schizophrenic statements ultimately amount to a profound psychosis. Joaquin both praises and condemns his heritage, but he cannot reconcile them. He himself seems to recognize this contradiction and acknowledge a deep sense of worthlessness permeating his being. He describes himself as a man with stifled pride, living in a country that has placed a different weight of indigeneity upon my...
Or dignity, bro.
Indignity upon my age-old black burden back. Inferiority. He explains that inferiority is the new loads, and that the mestizo must yet overcome. Curiosity, Joaquin cannot see the mestizaje inferiority are two sides of the same coin. The former is rooted in the latter.
Yeah, so I agree with the author's criticism of the poem and in saying that a lot of these statements are schizophrenic, because they're just irreconcilable. They contradict each other. You know, it's very apparent that the person stating these is just lost. Like, you don't know which side. It's like you're getting torn apart in half, basically. So yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. The thing I can liken it to is like, I don't know, like, would you ever have a black person feel this way? Like, as in, like, oh, well, I have white ancestry. Like, I need a I was both white, slave master, and slave. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just kind of one of those things where it's like the solution is just to discard that Spanish side if you don't want it. Like, now, if you want it, that's your choice, right? But a lot of us don't want it, and we don't care for it, and our identity is the native blood coursing through our veins. And I would say that's the more noble path, the more right path to take, especially because, again, Mestizaje and indigenous identity, Mestizaje has been designed to destroy that, and indigenous identity has been subdued for centuries. So really the noble act would be asserting that, would be going back to that, right, and ignoring the whole Spanish side. But, that's just how me and Marcus see it.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, Wanchelo, we're not forcing anyone to pick a side here.
Right. Because we get this criticism. It's like it's like we have like a desert eagle to y'all's heads, and we're like, pick one.
No.
And it's like, we never said that shit. Like, we're just heavily suggesting you. I mean, I think you should pick the indigenous side. But if you don't want to, I mean, go identify as a conquistador. I really don't give a hell. Oh, like it's go do what you want. Like, it's a free country, yeah. But but if you are, don't get in our way. That's another thing. I mean, because you can't have it both ways. If you're gonna get in our way, yeah, we're gonna fucking clown you.
They do like to get in our way.
Yeah, and then they cry foul when you're like, yeah, well, you're a moron, and then they start like, woo, and start acting dumb. So.
Yeah. In recognizing both Spanish and Mexica identity, Gonzalez is also saying in his poem what many defenders of Mestizaje say, that Mexican identity is mixed and layered and that the Spanish presence cannot be denied, but must be embraced. There are at least two problems with this argument. One, it overlooks the brutal crimes of the Spaniards and forces Chicanos and Mexicanos to abandon any claims for justice for the atrocities committed by Europeans against native people. Atrocities that include murder, rape, slavery, plunder of natural resources, ethnocide, and genocide. And two, it assumes that all Chicanos, Mexicanos, are mestizos, half Spanish, half Indian. While it is undeniable that some Mexicans are mestizos, many are not. Indeed, it is safe to say that most Mexicans cannot trace any Spanish or any other European ancestry. The perception held by the world and by Mexicans themselves that Mexico is a mestizo nation is almost completely false.
So what I'm going to add to this point is I don't know if there exists like really proper DNA studies done in Mexico where they sampled from every single Mexican state. But the fact of the matter is that, yeah, there's millions of full-blooded Mexicans that don't have any that don't have any European ancestry whatsoever. They're just completely full-blooded. The one thing I'll agree with these statements that he gave is that, yeah, a lot of Mexicans aren't half and half. There's plenty that are like you, Marcus, that are like 70-30 or 80-20. Like I would say there's a whole bunch more like that than there are people that are half and half. Like me, I'm pretty much half and half. I'm one of those people that like naturally fit that definition, but I still reject it. But I would say I disagree with the statement that most cannot trace any Spanish or European ancestry. I would say most people could in Mexico, unfortunately, because it is so mixed. But that doesn't mean that you have a large percentage of Spanish. Like, for example, like I said, I'm almost half and half, but I got black ancestry. I have plenty of black ancestors, but I'm not black. I'm like 4% black. I'm not black for all intents and purposes. I don't look it. I hardly have any of that DNA. So, again, ancestry does not equal what you are physically. I also wanted to make that very clear too for people, because some people, get confused with that. One other thing is, because I've also seen this pop up too, and I've had this thrown my way, because some people, they're like, well, since you're like half and half or close to half and half, then half your ancestors are European, Wanchelo. And it's just like, nope, because I did the genealogy and I've counted up my ancestors. It's like I have recent mixture that makes me close to half and half. But if you talk about genealogy wise, about 70 to 80% of my ancestors are Native American. 5 to 10% are black. The remaining 10% or so, 10 to 15, if you take the ranges or European. So again, ancestry, it's not equal what you are currently all the time. Only your recent ancestors would, right? But that doesn't take into account all your other lines or what happens to be passed down, right? So I just wanted to throw that in there. I do disagree with that part of the article.
I'm 6923, bro. Come on.
60, it's 70, whatever, man. I think some of these DNA tests aren't even as accurate as what we think. I think we might be a little higher because, I mean, it's only as good as the reference populations. So don't get me wrong. I still think that there's a use for some DNA tests, but I also think like if there's not really good reference populations, especially in the regions that you probably were indigenous to, then how accurate can they be? For example, like, do they have a freaking reference panel of like pure-blooded Guachichiles? Fuck no, they don't have that. So that's what I'm saying. I just have those like nitpicks with those DNA tests. You know what I mean? So
yeah, no, sorry, I was agreeing with you.
All right. Yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, that's just a couple things. And I've been wanting for us to get a geneticist on here at some point and maybe break down more about that, the DNA tests and what goes into it or all the science behind it, because for lay people, it's easy to like have misconceptions, right? But I'd like to have a geneticist on here at some point. But anyways, to begin with, intermixing between Spaniards and Indians during the colonial period was very limited, for the act was socially unacceptable to the Spaniards. Okay, yeah, I agree. Because even in my own lines where I have Spaniard lines, they stay very Spaniard for a couple hundred years. And it's not until like the mid 1800s towards the late 1800s, more so the late 1800s, that you see a lot of that mixture happening. So it's not like it happened. I mean, it did happen, right? 1500s, there's some mixture, right? But a lot of that did not happen until like the late 1800s or the mid 1800s. I was just going to say, at least from my observations, from what I've heard from people, because that's when it became more socially acceptable to do so. And they did away with caste. I mean, after like around the 1830s, because there's some places that kept doing it after Mexico became an actual independent country. But anyways, Indians were seen as inferior people, as pagans, cannibals, and sodomites. Natives were frequently described as lazy, dispossessed to vices, devious, and backward. Many Spaniards refused to marry native women, and most of those Spaniards who did have sexual relations with them often did so under the force of rape. In the colonial period, biological mixture was frequently the product of violence. And then he has a citation. Moreover, the offspring were often unrecognized by the Spanish fathers. These mestizos were almost never raised in Castilian fashion. Instead, they were nurtured under native tradition by their mothers and became culturally more Indian than Spanish. When they became adults, these mestizos usually married back into the native population, thus retaining an indigenous sense of an identity. Furthermore, an elaborate caste system was established by the Spanish crown to distinguish pure-blooded Spaniards from other races and to thwart the ascent of Indians, blacks, and mestizos on the social ladder of New Spain. Not surprisingly, this caste system helped generate resentment and self-hate among the dark-skinned colonized people who witnessed the social and economic privilege that were enjoyed by Mexico's lighter-skinned European population. Mayer and Sherman succinctly described the plight of the mestizo in New Spain. So I agree. And also, this comes from Jack Forbes. But in 1563, I know the Spanish crown prohibited mestizos from living in indigenous communities. So a lot of this was very deliberate, as you can see. It's a caste system forced to sow division, and it was very overt because you had segregation in this caste system as well. So also agreeing with this article too, you'll find this in Ben Vincent Third's book, Before Mestizaje. Initially, before they even created mestizo or the caste system, when a Spanish father was with an Indian woman, when a Spanish was with an Indian woman and had a child, right? That Spanish father could either accept or reject the child. If he accepted the child would be considered Spanish, despite the mixture, just completely Spanish. But if he rejected the child would be sent to indigenous community. Again, so even initially, there was no such thing as no caste system. It was until later on they did it. And they did it because a lot of these mixed children started spurring rebellion against the Spanish crown. So they put mestizo in to separate them from actually being a full-blooded Spaniard, to try to curb some of that shit. So again, very obvious. This is a tool of division, and I don't see why people like completely overlook this fact. Like, especially in debates, they completely want to negate what it was intended for.
I think that I'm gonna totally agree with you on that, man. And like in a lot of readings, when they talk about like the Spaniards wanted to create these Spanish settlements in Central and South America, most of those Spanish settlements were of like half Indian, half Spanish, so-called mestizos, and then maybe even natives that just identified as Spanish culturally, as being Spanish culturally, So it's different, and like with the invasion of the Incan Empire, the Battle of Cajamarca, I'm sure there's tons of like natives that served under the so-called like Spanish army that came from Mexico, like Clutch Collins that came, and others too that served under the Spanish. Well, not because it was the branch of the Spanish military led by Pizarro.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's because history is written by a lot of the Spaniards. They want to make it seem that like, okay, the Spanish did all of this. Military was comprised of like Spanish people. Even if you are like a mestizo, you're still going to be under that like Spanish, superiority. I don't know.
Right.
So it looks like we did all of this, not some half native, mixed breed.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that's really apparent with this cast system is if you look at all the charts, bro, it plainly depicts in the opening squares on the chart, right? If you bring it up, that you can create a Spaniard in like 3 generations, right? A full-blooded Spaniard, right? And it shows how it's like, oh, okay, Spaniard with the Indian woman creates a mestizo with another Spanish person creates a castizo, and then the castizo with the Spanish person creates a full-blooded Spaniard. But I don't see a depiction that shows the reverse, where they like a Spaniard is getting turned into a Native American. I don't see that, and it's like that's another obvious sign. It's so deliberately meant to freaking strip you of your identity and destroy that. It's genocide on purpose. It's identity genocide, and the fact that people again they just don't refuse to see that. Like there's just so many people me and Marcus debate with, and we bring up these points, and these people just either they read it and they just read it and dismiss it completely, or they don't even acknowledge it. They just completely pretend like we didn't even type that out. And it's just like, are you stupid or are you just intellectually dishonest? And it's usually always intellectual dishonesty. That's the number one thing I run into when we talk about this topic in general.
I mean, I just ask them how many times they bow down to their conquistador statue in their mom's basement, but it's what it is.
Yeah.
Did you have this other part?
No, that was you, bro. The mestizos were.
The mestizos were, by and large, poor and uneducated in a distinctly inferior socioeconomic class. For every mestizo who gained a comfortable place in society, there were 100 others who remained culturally adrift, living in miserable circumstances and scorned by the upper class. For most of the colonial period, they were grouped socially with Indians, blacks, and mulattoes. Furthermore, the indigenous population then far outnumbered and still outnumbers today the non-Indians in Mexico. It must remain clear that only 900 Spaniards accompanied Hernán Cortés in 1521 when he conquered the Mexica. In contrast, 150,000 people inhabited Mexico City, the Mexico City by conservative estimates. Some historians have calculated the number closer to 500,000, while still others place Tenochtitlan's population at 1 million. That's insane. These figures speak only of the Mexica City, which was located in central Mexico, a region estimated to have been inhabited by 25 million people. Overall, Mexico's entire native population is believed to have numbered 30 million in 1521, making Mexico more populous than any country in Europe. France, the largest, had about 20 million, and Spain roughly 8 million. Simply put, 900 Spaniards were insufficient to alter the racial makeup of the entire native population.
Like, yeah, 100% agreed, man. Like, again, everyone acts like literally we're all half and half. And that's why I was saying, no. Like, most people are like, your split markers are higher, like 80-20, 85-15, like what you would find with a lot of like African Americans, because again, their split is like 74-23, right? Yeah, like there wasn't like that much migration from Spain here. Like there was, but it's nothing compared to the way the English settlers in the North American or the U.S. continental like lands. You know what I mean? So that's what I find ridiculous when people assert, "Oh, we're all mestizos," and I don't know.
Yeah.
And then what this line right here in that first paragraph you read, which is another point I wanted to bring up. For most of the colonial period, mestizos were grouped socially with Indians, blacks, and mulattoes. There you have it. Like, again, it didn't really freaking matter that you were half and half. Oh, like, it didn't fucking matter. Like, you're not white. Okay, that's the whole thing. But it was the term was created to bastardize you, right? To say, oh yeah, but you're not indigenous. So it's kind of like you're this weird in between thing, I mean, it's so obvious, but people still refuse to see it.
Yeah, I remember when my friend, we were talking about like what the identity of what most people in South America were like racially, and he was like, "Well, aren't they kind of like just a bunch of mutts?" And I was just like, "Whoa, buddy, those are fighting words."
Yeah, like what the fuck, man? I'm about to draw my sword out, bitch. What are you calling a mutt?
Yeah, man.
No, like, I mean, okay, like that's like calling all African Americans mutts. Like, I mean, what the fuck is it? Like, because again, according to the DNA stats, most are a quarter white. So, but no one calls them mixed. No one does any of that in fucking nonsense. They give them the dignity of what they are. They're black people. It's the same thing should be extended to us instead of freaking calling us these like weird freaking half breeds and shit. Like, I don't know. It's so frustrating, man. Like, it's so frustrating hearing this. Like, me and Marcus want to get it to the point to where eventually, like, it just won't be the norm to even hear mestizo. That's not even going to be the norm anymore at all. Like, it's going to be really rare to hear that shit. Just as rare as it is to hear mulatto or something. That's our goal. Anyways, in addition, despite European and African migration to Mexico during the colonial period, indigenous people continued to vastly outnumber all other racial groups in New Spain. Even when the native population in central Mexico fell to its lowest point in 1650 to 1 million as a result of European disease and Spanish cruelty, it still exceeded whites, who were only 119,000. Blacks were 35,000. By 1810, native people numbered nearly 4 million, while whites were only 1.1 million. And mestizos only 704,000. More importantly, these numbers only reflect the demographics of central Mexico. And the northern and southern regions, the indigenous population is believed to have total at least 4 million in 1521. Although the native population here also dropped by as much as 95% in some areas during the colonial period, a conservative estimate of Mexico's indigenous population in 1810 can be placed at 4,250,000, 3.5 times the non-native and mestizo populations combined. Dude, case in point, man. Like, what the fuck? Like, the numbers are. And he has the citations here. If anyone's doubting, like, we're gonna drop this article in the description. But if anyone's doubting it, I mean, he has his scholarly sources. This is a very well crafted scholarly piece. So yeah, even by the numbers, dude, like it's ridiculous to say, oh, we're all mestizos. No, I don't think so. There's a bunch that aren't mestizos, especially not if you take the conventional definition, which is half and half. Okay. Yeah.
That reminds me of a book that I was reading about like Mayan history, and the woman was talking about the Spanish invasion, and she was like, even though like the Spanish invaders like came and had their diseases and weapons of war, after all of that, like the Mayans, like in the late 1500s, I believe, still outnumbered the Spaniards like greatly, in their area in Guatemala. So it's not. People keep thinking, like, especially in the United States, they think that we're all extinct and that the only Native American can be like the guy that looks like Chief Wahoo from the baseball team. And
people also use this dishonest thing where, I mean, okay, it's not completely dishonest, but it's still dishonest. Where they're like, well, there's some Spaniards that are dark skinned or they're really brown. And it's like, yeah, there are. But most Spaniards have like pretty fair skin. They're white people, like you can tell. Even if they have darker skin, you can tell apart European facial features from native facial features. They're completely different looking. They don't look the same. So, to say, oh, a bunch of Mexicans are all these people, they're only brown because the Spaniards can be brown. It's like, yeah, well, very few Spaniards are brown. A lot of them are white people. I've talked to Spaniards. I've had Spaniard international students back when I went to the university. I've talked to one of them about this subject in particular. I'm like, hey, are you guys over in Spain? Are you guys like white people? And she was like, yes. She's like, all Europeans are white. Now, I don't believe that. I think that's kind of like a really broad generalization. But basically, she lives in Spain. She's an international student. She was saying, based off her experience, we all white, fam. There you go. So again, that whole point I've always found really frustrating. It's like you're just playing stupid when you say that shit. Let's see. I left out from this paragraph. In this colonial society where whiteness was rewarded and Indianness was stigmatized, many of the colonized quickly forsook their native culture in a quest to become more white, both physically and culturally. Of course, the dark complexions and Indian features of most Mexicans barred them from attaining high social status in New Spain. But those who did pass as Spanish or European reaped the rewards. It is from this colonial tradition that so many Mexicans today often speak of the need to mejorar la raza, or to make the raza or the race better. This usually means forsaking native identity and marrying into lighter-skinned, Europeanized families. In the Chicano-Mexicano reality, Europeanness continues to be synonymous with beauty and social and economic opportunity. Conversely, Indianness is equated with the ugliness, backwardness, and poverty. To a large extent, Mexicans believe that the farther they distance themselves from identity, the better off they will be. I myself have never heard mejorar la raza like in my own life before I identified as Indigenous by my family, but I did see some of that whole like if you call somebody Indio as an insult, you call somebody Prieto or dark, it was an insult. So I saw some of that, but I know Citlali on Mexican Excellence has said that even in her own family, she has heard that mejorar la raza bullshit. So it's definitely there. A lot of and guys, if you're Mexican American, Chicano, or any of that, and you've heard that phrase in your own family, drop that in the comments. I'm curious to see how many of y'all have heard that. Drop it in the comments, please.
Yeah, please do. The desire to shed one's native ethnic identity is one of the most devastating consequences of colonization in Mexico. In his seminal work, Mexico Profundo, Reclaiming a Civilization, Guillermo Bonfil Batalla called this transformation de-Indianization. De-Indianization is a historical process through which populations that originally possessed a particular and distinctive identity, based upon their own culture, are forced to renounce that identity with all consequent changes in their social organization and culture. In Mexico, the Spanish colonizers were able to convince the colonized of their own inferiority, and once the population stopped considering itself Indian, then de-Indianization was complete. Because of these de-Indianized Indians could never truly be considered European, they were labeled mestizos instead. This process of shedding one's indigenous identity is linked with the desire to improve one's social economic condition. For Native people, remain the poorest, most subjugated group in Mexico. Since the Industrial Revolution, Indians have been desperately moving out of the rural areas and into cities and across the U.S.-Mexican border to escape the appalling poverty in the countryside. But for most of them, living in urban Western cities have forced them to abandon their traditional ways of life. This is in fact the experience shared by most Mexicans, families moving to the cities or across the borders and raising children who are removed from their indigenous heritage, becoming westernized and taking on the characteristics of the white society. Mexico also institutionalized this process of de-Indianization with the formation of the National Indigenous Institute, a federal program that runs various social and educational centers in rural areas. The goal is to improve life in indigenous communities by incorporating Indians into the modern national life. As Coe describes it, every effort is made to wean people away from their language and from their traditional cultures. Denying, oh, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say one thing that I've noticed from people that are detractors of ours is they have this like huge bone to pick with mestizos, right? Because they stepped out of those traditional indigenous communities and, you know, basically immigrated or moved to the city, you know, left that behind, right? And I always think that attitude is really callous because people do what they have to do. People do what they have to do to better their lives, to better their children's lives, to seek new opportunities. So instead of blaming the people who are victims here, you should be blaming the system. You should be blaming the people that instituted this system rather than being all hateful towards mestizos for going outside the traditional communities and all that. It's like, no, you know, be like, you know, you're just being, for lack of a better word, you're just being stupid. Look at why they did that and attack the people that made that so. That's what you should focus your energy on. But anyways, I'll continue off here. Denying and, in many instances, obliterating indigenous identity is the function of mestizaje. It is not a process of racial mixing and has very little to do with racial identity. Rather, mestizaje is an ethnic identity, one that is worn like a mask to hide the true indigenous face. The vast numbers of mestizos living in the big cities of Mexico and of the United States, who today comprise 60% of the Mexican population, are in actuality the contingent of de-Indianized Indians. They no longer identify as indigenous people, but remain so biologically. Although social differences exist between the Indian and the mestizo, both remain similar physically. As Batalla explains, the mestizo Mexican population, which today forms the largest part of the rural and urban non-Indian population, is very hard to distinguish in physical appearance from the members of any community that is recognized without question as indigenous. Both look Indian because they share traits that include dark complexions, almond-shaped eyes, and aquiline features. Aquiline means eagle-like features, like, you know, facial features, all of which are common physical characteristics of Native people. There is no denying that the immense majority of us have somatic traits that loudly proclaim our Indian heritage. Moreover, it is no accident that these traits are prevalent in the Mexican lower class while being almost absent among the ruling elite, who tend to be light-skinned and proud of your European lineage. The glaring physical and cultural differences that exist between those who rule and those who are ruled in Mexico is indication that racial mixing between Indians and Europeans was and it still is far less common than widely believed. Indeed, it is so uncommon that Mexico remains a predominantly indigenous nation. 28 million people are officially recognized by the Mexican government as Indian. An additional 56 million de-Indianized Indians, mestizos, are said to live throughout the country. Combined, they make up 90% of the Mexican population. Yeah, 100% agreed. Like 100% agreed. Now, I would say, yeah, because I mean, we have a wide range of phenotypes as well. Like, because again, it goes back to like one of those posts I had in the community section of our YouTube. We don't all exactly look the same. Like, so even if you have somebody that's like 80% indigenous and they're not as dark as somebody that's 100%, like, there's people that are 100% that are lighter skinned than that. Like, they don't, like 100% full bloods don't all look exactly one way. That's one misconception I've run into with people, that it's like they have this image in their head of what indigenous looks like, and they're like, well, if it doesn't fit this one little box, then you're not indigenous. It's like, bro, don't be stupid. Like, but yeah, no, I agree. Like, you really can't, like Marcus, like if you hadn't shown me your DNA results and you would have told me, oh yeah, I'm like 100% bro, and I probably wouldn't have questioned. I would have been like, oh, okay. Because you don't really look that much different, you know? So yeah, just making that point.
I appreciate that. I should have lied to you then.
Yeah, you should have been one of those, like, I don't need a DNA test. Like, look at my face.
Yeah, no. It's funny. I was going to say, add on to one point that you had brought up earlier regarding, like, people should be mad at the system, like, not at us. My mic was on mute, so I was trying to get that point across. And we were talking about the previous paragraphs, you know, because we have people that, you know, like to hate on us. So,
Right, and I've heard people talk about it like with a lot of disdain, like about the people that leave the indigenous communities. They're like they left. Like they talk with so much indignation. It's like you're stupid, dude. Like, why did they leave? What are the conditions that created that desperate need to leave? Like, what is it like? And it's like you should be blaming the conditions, the system. And I find it hilarious. Like some people are so hypocritical. They will blame capitalism and income inequality and blah 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 and like, oh, capitalism's evil and all this other bullshit. But yet they won't apply that same fucking thinking to this whole problem of mestizaje and why people embrace the mestizo thing and leave traditional communities. It's like, use your fucking head. It's like, be consistent, because that shit just pisses me off.
Makes me mad too. For Chicanos and Mexicanos, life since 1492 has been a process of de-Indianization. It is a quest to separate completely from our indigenous roots. We no longer have a sense of our ancient Mexican history, and for very few of us recognize any connection with the indigenous past. Mesoamerican civilizations are assumed to be something apart from ourselves, something that happened long ago in the same place where we, Mexicans, live today. The only connection is based on the fact of them and us occupying the same territory, but in different time periods. We are proud to be Mexican and secretly wish we could eliminate all traces of our indigenous heritage. As an ideology, Mestizaje allows this to some extent. It is a lopsided identity that favors the European component. It succeeds only in masking our indigenous sense of identity with a Western European visage. We can see this in various aspects of our culture. First of all, the Spanish spoken in Mexico is peppered with Nahua words. Example, tacayo, tomate, macate. But most Mexicans are not fluent in Nahua, and Spanish remains our lingua franca. Secondly, there is some syncretism in our religious beliefs. However, we do not worship a hybrid deity in sacred temples. We pray to Jesus Christ in cathedrals and remain decidedly Catholic. Finally, we may glorify Mesoamerican civilization and revere our indigenous heroes, but we ourselves do not identify as indigenous people, nor do we give our children indigenous names. Instead, we christen them with Christian, European names. As an identity, Mestizaje does not express an equal and harmonious balance of Mexica and Spanish culture. The European element tends to supplant the indigenous. Thus, we become Fox Europeans.
Or faux. I think it's faux. I don't know.
Faux Europeans. Thanks. With a poor understanding of our ancient Mexican past.
Yeah, these are really, really good points. And especially when it comes to the debate where some people are like, well, the fact that Spanish is riddled with a lot of Nahua words here in Mexico, and what he mentioned, like the holidays, right? There's like this like synergy, right? You mix a lot of the indigenous elements into these holidays. It's always funny because a lot of the people that argue about the culture and they're like, oh, you guys are basically just European culturally. It's like they will completely ignore these things you pointed out too. I also want to touch on this weird thing. So I've had people, which I always think is a really ignorant argument, when they're like, you're not indigenous, you have a Spanish last name. And it's just like, yeah, it's like technically Zapata, yeah, it's Spanish, but you know what people think of when they think of Zapata? They think of Emiliano Zapata, which was that indigenous rebel, that indigenous warrior. That's what they think of when they hear Zapata. They don't think of a fucking Spaniard. Like, so I always think it's weird when people are like, you got a Spanish last name. It's like, yeah, but yet when people hear Zapata, they only think of an indigenous man. So like, does it really matter?
African Americans have English last names.
Right. Like, again, yeah, it like the point is just stupid in general, but I just think it's funny whenever they use it on me, because it's like, dude, like Zapata, like that's a famous last name for an indigenous man. Like, but yeah, I agree. Like having whatever last name in whatever language doesn't make you that race, wherever it originates from. That's fucking retarded. So, well, like that's one of the dumbest points I ever see brought up. Me and Marcus ran into somebody that like actually used this argument recently, and Marcus, I remember Marcus went hard at him because he's like, "Bro, you might want to delete this before we embarrass the shit out of you."
I told him that. I was like, "Bro, you want to like delete your comment real quick to save yourself from any further humiliation?"
Yeah, dude. I was like, and he didn't. He didn't do it, so we humiliated him.
Well, here's the thing: like, people don't understand that. Like, one of the main reasons as to why many of us have Spanish last names is because when the Spaniards brought their little government trolls to our indigenous world at the time, they wanted to bring us into Christianity, Catholicism. So they gave us Spanish sounding last names. That happened a lot in the Philippines as well. Happened in Mexico, all over. Like that's how Western, civilizations back then operated when they, for countries like the UK and France and Spain, like they invaded and they gave everyone all these names so then it's easier to tax people when they have, European sounding last names. Because I could go further into that, but it's how they collect money from others. It's much easier to collect money from someone with the name of like, I don't know, Julio Vasquez or something, instead of someone with some like foreign sounding like, I don't know, Twalik, blah blah blah.
Right? Like but yeah, I mean, yeah, people also completely ignore that. It's like, bro, there's something called christening. Like, I'm fucking traced to like dozens of full-blooded Native American ancestors, and they all had Spanish names. You know how that fucking happened? It didn't happen through mixture. Happened through fucking christening because they became Christians. They were forced to become Christians. Like, holy shit. It's really not that hard to understand.
In this article, further, like, I think helps those understand that there weren't that many freaking Spaniards
right
around to like make it sound like we're all like mixed and have the Spanish last names for a reason. Like it further justifies our cause,
right? Yeah, no, exactly. Like, I mean, also like another thing to throw into the whole
you get a Spanish last name,
like that point is, bro, like the Guachichiles, we didn't even have last names, like to begin with. We just had a first name. So I already have a Guachichil first name. It's Wanchaloa. Like eventually I'll probably change it legally speaking, but I go by Wanchaloa. So I don't need, it doesn't matter that I have a Spanish last name. Guachichiles didn't even have last names. Like a lot of indigenous groups didn't even have last names, dude. Like you're freaking dumb.
Yeah. Like, and again, the Spanish administrators didn't want to have to deal with all these foreign sounding last names when they're going to tax it. All our asses. So they gave us European sounding names. It's easier to tax people that way.
Easier to track them down too, I bet.
Track them down, everything. Addresses, they gave them, what do they call them? Cedulas, which is like some sort of government identification. I don't know if Mexico had that, but the Philippines did. I think they're called cedulas, CEDULAS. So yeah, it's just, we were Europeanized or, through Hispanidad, Latinidad in some ways. And that's how we, we're given these names. Of course, like I do have, the ancestry of a Spaniards through some lines, but to say that we are all like, we all have these last names through rape is stupid.
Right. Yeah. It's a dumb point, man.
Yeah.
But continuing on, today, de-Indigenization continues as an increasing number of Chicanos, Mexicanos in the United States prefer to identify as Latino, a Eurocentric label that totally ignores our indigenous heritage. Also revealing is the Mexican and highly colonialist expression, no seas indio, don't be Indian. Again, I've mentioned, Mark, that shit's an insult. Or I don't take it as a freaking insult, whatever, but, it is to most people. An admonishment that connotates ignorance, racial inferiority, and the social and cultural primitiveness characteristics generally associated with Indians. The expression reflects the self-hate and racist disdain that Mexican society holds for the indigenous ancestry. This self-hate is further reflected in many Mexicans' desire to recognize and exalt their purported European heritage It is common, for instance, to hear Mexican families proclaim that a distant relative, usually a great-grandparent, was from Spain. Rarely do these families grant similar praise to their predominantly indigenous ancestors. In an article entitled Roots in Reality, published in Los Angeles Times, 25 January 2000, Jose Cardenas reported that most Mexican-American families that commission genealogy groups in Southern California hope to trace European lineage. For these families, an Indian is not a respectable ancestor. Mexican families will go to great lengths to downplay any non-European ancestry, even when powerful evidence exists that the family tree is indeed racially mixed. Eurocentrism prevails. For instance, Mario Grajeda, president of the Orange County-based genealogy group, sardonically observes that the Times article in the Times article that some families have 5 mulatto lines, 20 Indian lines, and maybe 2 Spanish lines, but boy, they're tracing the Spanish line. This is truly one of colonialism's great accomplishments, compelling the colonized to deny their indigenous identity and adopt a European one. Yes. I'm not surprised to hear this. As you guys know, I offer genealogy services. I mean, if y'all that are haters that want to trace your European lines, I mean, I'll still do that too, by the way. But at least, hey, all my clients so far want to just trace their indigenous side, which is great. But yeah, I've heard of this myth. The whole my great grandfather was from Spain. It's like, boy, they did not immigrate that recently, bro. Most people know. I would say my great grandfather, like in terms of my strictly like my mom's father, like his side, like his father wasn't from Spain, but I'm saying he was pretty much like completely European, like from what I've been able to ascertain and investigate. Like that's where I get a lot of my mixture is from my maternal grandfather, who I never met, and my mom never met either. So I'll go ahead and finish it off. We must come to realize and accept that there's nothing praiseworthy about Mestizaje. Mestizaje teaches us to loathe and deny our predominantly indigenous roots. It is a concept that has never advocated an equal and harmonious balance of Indian and European culture. Rather, it has distanced us from our ancient Mexican past and forced us to grope for a European identity. Like Gonzalez's Joaquin, we suffer from a cultural psychosis, juggling labels like Latino, Chicano, Raza, and Mexican American, which only obfuscate our indigenous identity. Our cultural schizophrenia is part of the legacy of the conquest, a legacy that has drenched us in self-hate and washed the indigenous world to ruins. Our redemption will only come after we abandon Mestizaje and redefine our ethnic identity on purely indigenous terms. This is the vital first step in reclaiming our ancient Mexican heritage and building a new future for ourselves as indigenous people. Until that day, we shall remain like Joaquin, tortured by self-hate and wallowing in an identity crisis. Yeah, this is a really, really good article. Thank you again, Fidel, Jose, for sending this excellent article that I really like. Obviously, if you're basically like completely European and you're from like one of these countries, then this doesn't apply to you. Like just throwing that out there. And for those people that just want to identify as European, just identify as European. We're not telling you not to, but a lot of us don't want to do that shit. So, and that's what I find so hilarious is like these people act like we're attacking them and like we're like evil or something. But it's like, bro, I have never once, and before I got into this whole, indigenous identity journey, right? I had never once before this ever heard people complaining about Hispanics identifying as white on the census or on documentation or anything. I had never once heard somebody bitch. Never once was that an issue. But it's like I get into this and I'm surprised to find it's like, holy shit. But if you want to do the reverse, oh my God, it's a fucking battle.
Good. Yeah. Very good, Juanchalo. You're right. Really shows you the issues with wanting to say that you're native, indigenous.
Definitely, man. Oh yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna drop the article in the description, but these are all the sources. They're all scholarly sources, which a lot of these I'm gonna try to take the time to read myself as well. Especially that Mexico Profundo book. I've had several people tell me it's a really good book that I should read, so I'm gonna be doing that. Right now, I've just been reading a lot of like Huachicol history and stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, same. Like for all y'all that are like, listening right now. Well, when the video's out, please like take time to maybe read this article again. It really does open some eyes. And what Juanchelo and I have been saying this whole time, this article is a great reflection on that. So yeah, just find, decolonizing articles such as this one. It really does help. And I think it'll make it more clear as for what Juanchelo and I stand for. Again, we're not like saying, don't say you're European and whatnot. Just like, it's a free country, do what you want. But we are here to support those that are wanting to connect more with their indigenous roots. So yeah, that's about all I want to say. But I will wrap this up with, thank you again for everybody that wants to, want to chip in with their comments, like, or, those that just subscribed. We appreciate it all. Juanchelo.
Well, the most important thing out of this entire 1 hour video is to the haters, we hate you too. And every view and comment helps us. And you're getting us ad revenue, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me. We'll talk about that later.
All right, my guys. You have a good one.
Yep. Bye.